I'm David Dorsey again from Osage University Partners, and now we're going to talk about bringing on a potential CEO, how to validate whether or not they're good, what questions to ask, what you're looking for in a CEO, why you should try to hire a great CEO. So, we have at our fund we have two teams: a life science team, which is investing primarily in therapeutics and sometimes diagnostics and devices, and then we have what we call the tech team, which is just literally everything else. And so I look at companies that are enterprise software, ones that are machine learning, analytics, and cybersecurity, but then also things in materials, things in hardware, semiconductors, you name it. So the type of CEO that you're looking for companies like this will vary and depend a lot on the domain, but there's a lot of things that are in common. That's what we want to talk about today. So first of all, let's just talk about just the importance of hiring a great team. Very often we have people who come to us after we have passed on an investment and sort of questioning, why did you pass on this company? They clearly have a great technology. They're the leaders in the field. The market is enormous. And so why not invest in the company? And very often the answer, almost always the answer actually, is that we just didn't feel comfortable with the team, and we didn't think that they were a great team, and they have some missing pieces, and we would look at this again if they brought in maybe an outside CEO or some of the other missing management. So management's really important to investors. They, typically with the way we think about deals at a high level is kind of team, product, market, and then in this case, product is also technology. And if you have a great product and a great technology, that's fantastic. If the market's big enough, that's like table stakes. It has to be big enough. But without a team, it's very difficult to feel comfortable investing in a company. So the single most important thing your startup can do is to hire a great CEO. We'll talk more about there's a chicken and egg problem here. It's very difficult to hire a great CEO when you don't have traction yet, right? But we wanted to do the best we can to hire great talent and to bring in a great CEO, even if they're interim, and what to do if you have to bring if you have to bring in somebody who's going to hold the reins for the first couple of years, but then later on you want to bring on a great CEO, that kind of thing. So we're going to talk about all of those things. Choosing the right person really has to be like a careful process, because you're going to be working with them probably for the next 10 years if things go well. Actually, you'll be working with them for the next 10 years, maybe if things don't go well, which is bad. So common paths to success at startups typically involve bringing someone who's done it before. Like, it's very difficult for someone who's really, really smart to know what to do next if they haven't developed some kind of pattern recognition about where they are, where the company is, and what to do next. All of this, of course, has to be caveated. There's always exceptions. Every successful CEO is at one point a first-time CEO, and there's some people who just do well the first time. But again, you're trying to diminish risk. You're trying to bury some risk here, and one way to bury risk is to increase your chances that someone is going to be able to navigate difficult, challenging situations that are going to arise with the company, and be able to execute on some of the most important aspects of having a company, which is to continue to hire other great talent, to continue to raise money, and to make sure that everybody's executing and creating value for the company. So the dilution that you're going to give away to a non-tech co-founder, just any co-founder, because actually they may be a technical person too, really is minimal compared to what you're going to be giving away to VCs who are going to do far less for you in many cases, and except they're going to give you a ton of money that you're going to need to operate. So you really have to think about this relative to the other important things you're going to spend money and give equity for. This is the biggest decision you're going to make. So there's a couple ways to do searches. One, at an early stage, without resources, very often you're going to just drive the process yourself. You're going to leverage your network and your network's network, and you're going to leverage any investors that you meet along the way, the tech transfer office, the people in your ecosystem, a local business, just anybody, to ask them, hey, do you know somebody who would actually be a good fit or would have the right expertise and you meet with that person and you ask them if they know anyone that would be a good fit for our company. And what you got to get in the habit of doing, just having 30-minute conversations with people who've done this before, and just see if there's any chemistry, because that's actually what you're really looking for here, is someone that you can trust and who can execute. And if they like you and you like them and they get excited about your idea, this is the one sale you really have to do. Like if you're not a salesman, this is the one sale you got to nail. Like you're going to have to sell your vision, and you're going to have to sell the excitement about the company to at least one other person. One of the other things you do is kind of come out of stealth. Some of the companies will stay underground until they've got all their ducks in a row, and it may not be necessary, and may be a good idea actually for you to just sort of expose yourself so that you can generate inbound. One way that companies do this, early stage companies, is, especially on the tech side, is they'll join an accelerator or something like that, where they'll get more exposure to other people who are talented and other early stage investors as well. The other thing you can do is you can talk to the tech transfer offices, talk to seed investors and other friendly VCs, and see if they'll do the work for you, especially if you've got people who want to invest in the company. They should help you recruit. Like at an early stage, when you're if you've got investors who are interested in investing in the company, and you've all agreed that like you really could use an outside CEO, what you really want to do is put those investors to work and let them help you find an outside CEO. And the other thing is recruiters. They cost some money, but it's really worth it if you can afford to hire a recruiter to run a process for you. I think it actually pays off. All right, so we're going to run through an example, and it's a fake company that we made up. And the reason why we're going to do this is just kind of think about the questions you should be asking and how you should be thinking about the qualifications for a CEO. So we're picking a company that is sort of typical in what we see in the tech VC world, which is it is an exciting, promising technology with no revenue, and it's going to have to raise a bunch of capital in the future. And so this company is called Quantum Qubit, and they expect to have some kind of commercial product available in 2 years. It's not going to be the full product, but they'll be able to get to revenue, they think, some revenue in 2 years. The company develops both the hardware and application software. This is a photonic quantum computing hardware machine, so it's using photons instead of superconducting qubits. And so they're also, in the next 2 years, they need to establish close collaborations with corporate partners to define use cases. This could mean talking to cloud companies, some of the big tech companies. This could also mean talking to energy utility companies. It could be fintech use cases or health care use cases, but like whoever you're bringing on has to be able to actually navigate these kinds of partnerships and collaborations. And maybe you're looking for someone who's done that before. You're going to need to raise $3 million seed now, but in 2 years, you're going to want to raise a $20 million Series A. And if you were here for the previous talk we just finished, the one way to think about equity that you're giving away to someone is to think about it in terms of the value of the company and how much dilution you're going to give away. The value of the company is increased when you bring on somebody who has a demonstrated track record. And if they can successfully navigate some of these milestones, like creating partnerships or getting early revenue, that means when you go out to raise a lot of capital, $20 million Series A, your valuation will be higher and everyone will suffer less dilution. And so you're bringing on the person at the seed round who's going to actually protect you from getting diluted too much in the next round. Today, you got a 3-person engineering team in place. You're clearly going to have to do more recruiting, right? So that's the basics of the company. So now we've got 4 candidates. We're lucky, like right away, we got 4 inbound candidates, and they all sound pretty good. So candidate A has 10 years experience, first as an engineer at Broadcom. The second one and he left that to become a VP of product development. So he's got some product experience at a networking startup that Cisco acquired for $200 million. So you've got someone who has enterprise experience, so understands the enterprise side of the table, product experience at a startup. So they also have some startup experience. Candidate B is a 3-time successful entrepreneur in software, hardware, medical devices. It's a serial entrepreneur. One company went public, one was acquired by Medtronic, and one of them is still private. Candidate C is a former general manager at IBM's quantum computing group. So has domain expertise in quantum computing. Prior to that was a CTO of a server business at IBM. And candidate D is the founding professor of the company that has actually served as a CTO of a previous university spinout for 2 years. That was in the resistive RAM memory space. Not exactly the same domain, but clearly this is a person with domain expertise because they're founding the company, they've been doing the science, and they have some experience with a hardware company and doing sales. So without knowing anything else, we haven't asked any other questions about this. It would be good if you just from these descriptions, pick what you think is the ideal candidate or the best candidate of these four. And hopefully if the polling works, we can find out what your answer was. And I don't. Yep.
Hey, David. Looks like the 19 people have currently voted.
Okay, good.
Up for just a few more minutes if anyone else would like to vote. But right now, looks like candidate B is taking the lead. Good.
And honestly, like I think with these facts, you know, the successful entrepreneur, someone who knows how to start a company and take it to an exit, is actually probably the best guess. I mean, that's right. And you know, there's no completely right answer here. We have found that there are people who are successful entrepreneurs, and the domain, like a successful entrepreneur has this kind of characteristic where they can learn a domain quickly enough to add value. And so they tend to absorb information, and they're able to iteration. And so successful entrepreneurs that have had experiences in different kinds of companies are actually a good thing. So that's a pretty good vote. So then digging a little bit deeper, let's ask some questions about candidate A. So we start doing some diligence and asking around, and you kind of think of the kinds of questions that we have to ask. So at the high level, candidate A sounds good. 10 years experience, you know, and worked at a successful networking startup. So candidate A here, the kinds of questions that I would ask here is, what does their track record look like? Interim promotions, were they in the right engineering group at Broadcom? A lot of times in a really big enterprise like this, they might be working at a small niche group that is not, you know, creating a ton of sales. So you really want to dig into like where they were working. Titles at these large companies tend to mean something different depending on the company. So you can't go by VP because it might not mean much. So you want to find out if the startup was really a success, how much capital did it raise? You also want to find out how critical this candidate's role was at the startup. Very often, when you have a startup that was acquired by another company and it was a successful acquisition, lots of people will assign themselves credit for the exit and for the founding of the team, because it looks good on your track record. But you really have to dig in to find out exactly what their role was at the startup. So how influential were they on the senior team? And you want to ask other people who might know, previous investors, other people who worked with them at the time. Any kind of transitions on people's LinkedIn page you want to find out about, and ones that aren't on the LinkedIn page especially. So why did they leave Broadcom? How do we get comfortable with their quantum computing knowledge is another question. Like, how well do they know this domain? Is this a curious person? Can they learn enough to have discussions about quantum computing use cases with partners? And you know, we always ask them things like what do you do to stay current? Like, what do you go to talks? Do you watch online talks? Do you have a network of people that you regularly check in with to find out like what the latest and greatest, you know, technologies are? Just want to find out that they're a curious person and that they're constantly learning. And then you really want to dig into their leadership skills. How were they as a manager? What kind of quality people have they recruited in the past? And always, whenever there's a transition, if they brought anybody with them along for the transition, like other people left and followed them, it's always a good sign. So you want to find out about that too. And then this is the stuff that's hard, like innate talent, like how much raw talent does this person have? Are they intelligent? Do they have a force of nature personality? Are they passionate? Are they a continuous learner? You really have to spend time with them to try to understand how they think. And the first meeting is never the best indicator. Usually you have to kind of have multiple meetings with this person before you realize sort of what they're truly like, and when they've gotten off their script. So for all of these, we want to find out if they're good listeners and they take feedback from others. Now, since B was the candidate most people chose, let's talk about the questions we want to ask here. So if you knew this, you probably wouldn't have picked this, but very often with serial entrepreneurs, with a track record that looks great, when you dig in, it's always a little messier. And sometimes it's fine, like the mess is fine, but you want to find out all the details, the dirty details. So you want to understand the timing and role that they spent in each company and the success behind each one of these companies. So he founded the first company 10 years ago. It went public 5 years ago, and it trades at $1 billion today. That's great. The medical device company was acquired by Medtronic for 80 million, but it raised 50 million, which is not great. That's not a great return for everybody, but still, you could have learned a lot from that transaction, and still, you sold a company to Medtronic. So you will ask him about the private company, but that's still private, so there's no public information. The only thing we know that it's funded by top tier investors, Sequoia and Excel. That should help a little bit more, because some other VCs have really kicked the tires and done their own diligence on this person before they had backed them. And so you're not the first person to take a look at them. But you certainly want to try to meet some other investors that have backed the person. The CEO recruited a replacement after raising a venture round because candidate B thought the company needed domain expertise. So this is a good sign, because it means that this candidate was willing to step out of the way so that the right person with the right expertise could drive the company to its final exit. That's really a good sign. But when you dig in further, this is often what happens. I've had times where I've done initial diligence calls and got more excited about a candidate, only to dig in even further and ask those people to connect you with someone else that they knew. So you got kind of getting a layer deeper into diligence calls. When you find out that, like, candidate B was not at the first company at the time of the IPO. So he left, actually the company left 3 years earlier. And the way that he was phrasing it was that he left because the right person needed to be there with the right expertise, but he actually left far before the IPO. And so, like, he didn't see the company to an exit. The medical device buyout was 30 million up front, which means that the investors really only got paid 1x, and everybody else in the team got nothing. $50 million was earnout, not yet paid. So to say that it's sold for 50 million really isn't the truth. And then with a company that's still private, B was pushed out by the VCs, actually, because the candidate executed poorly, recruited badly. You found that out by talking to the VCs and asking them questions about, like, the person's leadership and whether or not they're a good CEO. This is really kind of to point out the fact that the first round of diligence you do with the people that they tell you are their top references usually will paint a better picture. And then as you get further and further in the network of people who have worked with this person, it tends to get worse. And sometimes it doesn't get much worse. And sometimes it's fine. It's enough, actually, where you can accept that actually this is a really good person. Sometimes it gets really bad, and you just, thankfully you found out now before you brought them on and gave them a chunk of equity in the company. Candidate C, we'll kind of breeze through the rest of these here. So the candidate C was a formal general manager at IBM's quantum computing effort. You find out that this person has a strong technical knowledge on quantum computing, was at IBM for 30 years. One of the things that you have, and this happens a lot, is that this is a person who has been at a very big company for a long time and is probably getting a very high salary, and is usually not willing to take a cut in salary when they join. They're indoctrinated to a certain kind of lifestyle, a certain kind of way of doing business, and also a lifestyle that's afforded by these salaries as well. Sometimes you'll meet CEOs for startups that are raising a Series A, and you find out that they have a whole administration team around them, because that's what they're used to, just kind of layers of support staff around them. which is wasteful for a startup that needs to be really scrappy. So this person expects 300K salary a year from the startup after they get funding, and that's high. You want to negotiate a fair salary, but really what you want to find out is that the person is committed to equity. They're committed to the outcome here, and they're not committed to a salary that is similar to what they were getting paid before. In fact, what you're trying to do is get them to actually take a risk with you. And it's not much of a risk for them if they're actually getting paid around the same they were getting paid before, whether you win or lose. So you want incentives to align here. Candidate D was the one who was is the founding PI. So that's the professor. The person has lots of industry connections. Corporations have begun exploring quantum computing, have been doing inbounds. This person has talked to lots and lots of corporations. Several members of this candidate's lab want to follow him into the company, but the candidate feels disgruntled after being forced out of the previous company when a new CEO is brought in. And what you're really trying to watch out for with academic founders, this is not always true, but is sometimes the case, is they actually are the right CEO for the first few years of the company. And maybe they're the long-term CEO because they have the domain expertise. They may actually have the personality, and they may be good at sales. But the problem is that you want to figure out whether or not this person is actually doing what's best for the company, or if they're trying to prove themselves. And so it may not be as obvious when you know, like in this case, where you talk to previous investors and you find out that they were disgruntled because another CEO was brought in. A lot of it is just talking to them. And really what you want to hear is that they would do the right thing. If the company gets to a stage where they're not the best fit for a CEO, they would step aside for the right CEO. And so you just, that like you have to earn some trust. This is as an investor deciding who to invest in. Very often the right we invested in a couple of quantum computing companies actually, and in both of those cases actually it was difficult to find a CEO at the first financing, and so the CEO was the founding professor for the first 1 or 2 years until an outside CEO was brought in. So now the poll is a little bit easier now because we've found out more information, but you found the sort of good and bad. I guess the answers would change. And so now I'd ask you again, from the 4 candidates, so what do you do at this point? I'm just going back.
Looks like 16 out of 26 have voted. So if you'd like to vote, just a few more minutes of live polling, but it looks like candidate D is taking the lead now.
Yeah. Well, while the rest of you are putting the votes, it's always a difficult choice. In the case, like I said, we actually picked candidate D, and it's worked out well. It doesn't always work out well. For some companies, there's significant sort of technical roadmap along the way, and there's a lot of partnerships that have to be developed. And sometimes the founding professor, the scientist, is really the best person to sell the product. And the idea, just because they know it so well. If it is a person who has kind of a low ego, is a good listener, is actually good at recruiting talent, especially if you see people from their lab who want to join the startup rather than take a position at a big corporation with a high-paying salary, it's all a good sign. So candidate D actually makes a lot of sense here. The candidate A is another one I think is probably kind of second choice is it's also good. If candidate B, some of you still chose candidate B, and I get to make the argument that that's still okay. You have to be comfortable with the person and feel that you can trust them. That is a person who's had a lot of experience, right? But the thing I worry about as you dig in further to diligence is that some problematic personality type issues. So it isn't the fact that they've had some failure in their past. It's actually the fact that like they may have an ego as part of the problem, or maybe they're not transparent and honest, and that's why we worry about things like that. But I think that's kind of the right way to think about it. All right, so when we do candidate reviews, we want to keep in mind the fact that there are lots of molds of successful entrepreneurs. There's no one, stereotype mold for what is a successful CEO. He or she can have lots of different kinds of backgrounds, lots of different kinds of personalities. They don't always have to be super salesy. Sometimes they're more reserved, but still compelling. And so like you want to sort of clear your mind of any idea of what a traditional successful CEO looks like. Many entrepreneurs though seem strong at first, and you really like the important point here is that you want to peel the onion back as much as you can. And so if they have experience, that you want to find out if they've had a successful track record, like how much did they contribute to the success in the past, if it was successful, and especially if they've failed in the past, just make sure that they kind of acknowledge it, because it's there's a question of trust and ethics here, and that they've learned from it. Most companies fail, like lots of companies fail, and so the person who has had a successful company once and hit it out of the park actually sometimes is at a disadvantage because they actually think they've found the secret formula for success, and there may not be one. And so they want to keep kind of revisiting the same things that have worked for them in the past. So sometimes, a mix of success and failure is good. And what you really just want to see is that they're actually open to admitting weaknesses, and that they're honest and transparent. Like you have to trust them. It's a major component of bringing someone on board to run your company and execute your vision. If they have no experience at all, you definitely want to make sure that they recognize that. Like people who don't have experience running a startup should be able to admit that they're going to need to bring in talent, and that's their number one job. Like to say things like, I don't actually know how to, like I don't have experience negotiating very complicated enterprise contracts. And so I'm going to need to bring on someone that's going to have to help with that, someone with that kind of experience. I know a few people in my network and we should start talking to them soon. That's what you want to hear. You don't want to hear somebody who thinks that they're going to learn it all on the job. They may learn a lot of it on the job, but what you really like to hear is that they're actually open to bringing on as many people as they can. They don't have to be the smartest person in the room. In fact, good CEOs are usually people who don't want to be the smartest person in the room. They actually want to bring in people who know more than them and can help drive the company to a successful exit, because they're incentivized by the exit, by the value that's going to be created. And then also, just ask them the question, if we get to a point where we're at a growth stage and this, your skill set just isn't the best fit for where this company is, are you willing to step aside? As a hypothetical, like, are you willing to step aside if we have to give someone else the reins of the company? And it's a good question to ask, just to kind of gauge their thoughts on this. And so it may be that they say, well, I'd like to ride this out as long as I can, but I am fully aware of my shortcomings, and where we get to a point where it's obvious that I'm not creating value. I think that, like, obviously we'll have to look for someone to take my place. Like, just want to hear that they're doing what's right for the company. And that I guess the thing I would not want to hear is, don't worry, I am going to take this company to a successful exit. Like, it's always good to hear stuff like that, but actually it's often an indicator of just too much ego, and it's going to get in the way in the future. Ideally, the candidate has some direct experience with the domain, or at least is willing to bring on domain experts that they're going to learn from in the future. So they don't necessarily have to know anything about quantum computing, for example, to run the company. What they need to do, and more important in these cases actually, is that they need to be able to foster good relationships with channel partners and successful relationships with potential customers. And really important is that they're going to be able to recruit great talent. So let's just talk about some of the characteristics that you're looking for. Track record success, strong judgment, continuous learner. We've talked a lot about these. Domain expertise, either because they're bringing on someone who has it or they have it directly. A great leader, ability to attract and retain talent, intensely entrepreneurial and passionate. And like this can mean lots of different things, but it's a person who thinks about value creation and not just sort of getting to the next financing round. Like they're thinking about always about how we're going to actually create a lot of value so that everybody has a good exit, a return on this investment of time and energy from the team. You want this person to be a hands-on manager, has clear examples of strong execution. And this is also really important. They have to be a good fundraiser. Like this is a person who always has to be selling. They have to be selling the company to investors. They got to be selling the companies to top recruits. Like people are getting pulled in all different directions. If they're a really good, talented person in this field, they're probably getting offers all the time from startups to leave their day job or to leave their successful startup that is now at the Series C to go join some riskier venture that might have a high payoff. This is a person who has to convince them that this is worth it. Like this, if you're going to take a risk, like this is the risk. Join me, join the team. You know, we're all going to have fun and we're going to build something amazing and we're all going to make a lot of money in the end, right? They have to sell this to everybody, including recruits. And finally, they have to sell it to customers. Like this has to be a good fundraiser, a good salesperson. This also, and this goes back to the kind of thing we were saying before about, hiring someone who's been at, a large corporation for 30 years may not be able to operate something on a limited budget. And so for the early years of the startup, what you're thinking about is someone who knows how to allocate resources well. They're not going to spend it on things you don't need right now. And, investors call that being scrappy. Ethics are really important. Like this has to be a person of high integrity. You have to trust her that she's going to, like what she's saying to you is fully the truth, that she's always giving you all the details and not trying to hide it until she can fix it and come back and show it to you when it's all perfect. Like someone who's just saying, by the way, here's the current status, here's how I'm planning to deal with it. And you know that you can always trust them to come to you when there's issues. And mostly like you're just looking for people who deliver on these promises. But the CEO requirements change over time. And so I want to take a second here to think about this. When you're initially doing a spin out, you have a limited budget, you've got a small team, your customers may not even have any customers yet, you have to recruit a certain kind of talent. So that person has to be a strong recruiter and a strong fundraiser, hands-on, technically strong, because you're still building product here, and they should have the ability to collaborate with other inventors. That's the person that you're looking to bring on now at the early stage. So then the challenges though, is that as you're getting further down the road and you're scaling up, now you need to do product development. And so you need someone who's good at finding product market fit. They also need to have a strong sales talent, for partnerships. But again, they have to be a strong recruiter and a strong fundraiser. And it turns out they have to be a strong recruiter and a strong fundraiser at any stage of the company. And so you're trying to find somebody who actually can grow into these roles over time, because every time there is a transition, we were talking before about, would you step aside if you weren't creating value and another person could do a better job than you? You want to ask them that because you want to know that they would step aside if they had to. But in truth, from an investment standpoint, anytime there's a transition, anytime there's a swap in management, there's a risk. Like there's a risk that you could create factions within the company. There's a risk that some other people might leave when the CEO leaves. There's lots of risk associated with that. So if you're really lucky, you can find someone who will grow into the role when you're at the commercialization stage. But remember, the one thing that's got to be true of this person at any stage is that they have to be a strong recruiter and a strong fundraiser. They have to be able to do those two things no matter what. There's one question here. Let me read it out loud. SaaS subscriptions product generating some revenue in the first year. Does one look for a CEO or salesperson to grow and become sustainable. So in this case here, I think what you're saying is you've got a company that's already generating some revenue, right? And it's a SaaS company, they have subscriptions. And so what kind of talent are you looking for? Should you just bring in a salesperson, or do you need a right CEO? And if I understand the question correctly, what you're looking for actually, if it's a SaaS company that's already found some traction, that means they're at this point now where they're demonstrating some kind of product market fit. And the expertise you're looking for is actually someone who knows how to drive SaaS growth, someone who knows how to manage things like churn, how to become more efficient so they can reduce, customer acquisition costs, how to get their lifetime value up. Like, you want someone who's good at this. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be a salesperson. It just has to be someone who understands kind of the SaaS business and how to manage those metrics, because they're going to change over time as they grow. But yeah, I think in any case, if it's a SaaS product and they have to be doing still kind of outbound sales to, if it's a B2B SaaS company, then yeah, you certainly want someone with a good, strong sales background. And very often when you're looking for a CEO, you want somebody with a strong sales background, or as I was saying, like just someone who just has a salesman's personality. Right. So I think that's important. They have to, for a SaaS company that's got already revenue and things like that, depending on what their current metrics will look like in terms of churn, customer acquisition costs, and things like that. Very often what you're looking for is a person who can actually build a good sales engine. And so it's great if someone already has experience doing that. So I'm not sure if I answered the question exactly, but feel free to follow up with that. So one of the other things that we've mentioned this a couple of times is how to diligence the candidates. So one tool right now, like maybe this will be true far into the future. One tool right now that's still very helpful is LinkedIn, is to find common acquaintances of that person, who they're connected to, and look up former colleagues and direct reports, anybody that used to work with them. By the way, LinkedIn's also really helpful for actually finding candidates. I didn't say this before, for you're looking for CEO candidates. One thing that I do when I meet a company and they're looking for a CEO or a chief product officer or someone like that, is I'll go on LinkedIn and I'll find companies that are around the Series C or Series D stage, late stage, but they were on the founding team. And I'll just reach out to them to see what they're up to, ask them if they would ever consider leaving, and then talk about this company to them. And the reason why you're kind of looking for these late stage founders is that at that point, the company has gotten to a point where they're having more and more meetings, and this might be a person that's just bored at this point and would consider jumping out of their position for something more fun. I also look at companies obviously that have IPO'd or exited or gone through an M&A process or things like that. But LinkedIn's very good for this. But you want to find people who have worked with them before, and in particular ones that are direct reports that they didn't offer up as a potential candidate. And very often I'll tell them, like, I'm reaching out to so-and-so that used to work with you. Sometimes I reach out cold to people if I am connected to them. So I'm looking for connections that I have to people that this person's worked with before, that I can just sort of reach out on my own directly and not have to ask for a connection. Call any previous investors, research their past companies, find out if they really did well. If you don't have access to kind of Crunchbase and PitchBook, see if you know someone who's an investor who has access to those things. You can find out how well the company did. A lot of these things you can infer by looking at the news. Ask the candidate to do a project for you. So that's one other thing you can do. We do this a lot when we're hiring people, is to kind of just give them a little bit of work that has to do with your company. And that could be something as simple as, could you design some messaging for me for a fintech product? Or give me a list of companies that you think would be first early targets for our project. Like, how should we think about how to go after Fortune 500 companies? Can you make an initial list of targets? Show me some connections that you have, and just have them work on something and get back to you and talk about it. When you're doing reference checks now, this is important. one of the things you're trying to find out is actually, you're trying to find out if this is a great candidate. They may be friends with the person. They don't want to necessarily be completely open. Some of them do. And so you want to be really quantitative in your questions and not qualitative, because you give them an easy out if you ask them things like, so are they good? You know, did you like working with them? Like, all of those things are really qualitative, and it gives them an easy response to say, yeah, I like working with them, or yeah, they're great, right? And instead, what you want to do is kind of get them to rank order this person against other people they've worked with. Like, so out of all the chief product officers that you've worked with, how would you rank these people? Or from a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being just knock it out of the park, great CEO. Like, how would you rate this person as a potential CEO candidate? Like, try to get some data. And the other reason why it's helpful is because as you have multiple calls, you can compare what each one of these references said in a meaningful way, because you gave a quantitative scale. You want to be upfront about your concerns that you have on the candidate. Sometimes they don't say anything mean about the candidate until you say something very specific. Like, you may say, so one of the issues that came up was, I found that in the last company they're working for, it seems like a lot of people left in their unit just before they left. And so I haven't really got a straight answer on this, but I'm just trying to see, like, is this a person who rubs people the wrong way? Like, do they work well? Like, what do you think do they have good leadership qualities? And just like sort of lay out what you're concerned about. And sometimes when you do it that way, they feel more comfortable to say, yeah, actually, I kind of saw the same thing. But you have to give them an in. Like, you have to give them some way to feel comfortable being honest with you. And one way that you can get them to open up is to identify specific weakness that you're concerned about, and see if they agree with you. They may also say, like, I'm really surprised to hear that, because that was not my experience at all. That's a good sign, right? What you want to do is avoid confirmation bias. You know, sometimes you really want this person to work out, and so when you go asking other people what you think of them, what they thought of this person, you're asking them questions in a way that would make it easy for them to agree with you. And if you state up front that you're really excited about this candidate, you're not going to get much information on this person, because they're not going to want to ruin it for the reference, and they can tell that you're likely to actually bring this person on, and chances are you're probably going to tell this person what they said. So you just want to go in there seeming completely neutral, and if not neutral, actually concerned, like identifying specific weaknesses. Oh, this is another thing about pregnant pauses. I'm not as good at this as my managing partner. But when you ask for negatives, like sometimes you'll ask the question like, are there any questions you don't think I'm asking? Are there any weaknesses that you can think of about this person that I should be aware of? And then just pause for a long time. And sometimes what they'll do is they'll say, no, I don't think of anything. And then don't say anything. And then you say, no, I just don't think nothing except this one thing. And then, like, if you give them enough time, they get uncomfortable and they just sort of want to fill that empty space. And then eventually they'll tell you something they had no intention of telling you. So just make sure you give them time to give you all the information. So get as much out of this conversation as you possibly can. That's how investors diligence candidates. And so that's how you should do it too, if you're thinking about bringing somebody on. You know, you probably could figure out some of this. You know, the great CEO has to have vision. They should be driving to be a leader in the space. Their mentality should be, we're going to be the best. We know the competition. We're going to hire the best talent. We're going to hire, recruit the best salespeople, the best engineers, and that just like they're driven by the success of the company. They should be able to think at a very high level and understand sort of like think strategically. So very often you'll find CEOs who actually are too much in the details. Like, they actually know how to execute on a process, but they talk about the process in detail, and it doesn't seem like they're able to step back and strategize and think about long-term strategy. You worry about that sometimes because very often CEOs are going to have to pivot strategies because something's not working. You want them to be realistic and you want them to be modest. You want them to be able to identify what they lack. They have to be really good at communicating because they're going to have to, drive people to work really hard when they're not getting paid a ton of money. And so there are going to be times when things aren't going well and it doesn't seem like they're going to get better anytime soon. This has to be a person who has to be able to earn the trust of the people that are working under them and to be able to communicate that, and sell them on the future. The best CEOs, sometimes you'll say they have a low ego when it comes to addressing their own personal weaknesses, but they have a high ego in that they're irreverent about the industry that they're disrupting. So they're not going to be intimidated by the competition. They have to believe really that they can disrupt this market and displace the number one competitor. And so they should have a high ego in that sense, but then also know that they can't solve it all by themselves and that they're going to need other people. And then adaptability goes into everything else we were talking about in terms of pivots and being able to take advantage of, a competitor has changed their product. And so there's an opportunity all of a sudden to take a part of the market that you didn't have before. And they can act quickly on information as it's coming in. They don't sort of take weeks to think about things and have several meetings to figure out what to do next. They can take advantage of an opportunity as it presents itself. So really kind of, we'll call it an action-oriented person. That's what you're looking out for. Now, all this being said, at the early stage, when you're not fully funded, it's going to be very hard to get a person who checks all these boxes. And so very often you're in a situation where you're looking for a CEO, but there's just none available. Like none of them check the boxes. None of them are good enough to really bring on. And so, there's options like hire less than a perfect CEO, hire an interim outside CEO, have the academic founder serve as the interim CEO. And in this case, we're talking to the academic founder. So you are the CEO, or have no CEO. And so none of these are the perfect option, but number 3, having the academic founder serve as the interim CEO is the one that most often works. The reason why is companies who say they have no CEO, so in other words, they're going to investors and they're saying, we don't have a CEO, we're actually hoping you can help recruit one. Whoever's talking to the CEO at that point, whoever said that to the venture capitalist at that point, that's really the CEO. Like they haven't taken on the title, but they're the ones driving this investment. So for the time being, at least, if the academic founder is saying we don't have a CEO, they should just say that they're the CEO for now, right? Interim CEO doesn't really mean anything. That title's weird. Sometimes you hear somebody say that they're the interim CEO. They should just say that they're the CEO for now. And I'm going to do this as long as I am still valuable and helpful, and until we find somebody who's a better fit and who can do a better job than me. But the worst possible thing you can do here is to hire a less than perfect CEO for the time being. And it goes in, the reasons are the ones that we outlined before in founders equity. It's just that you're going to give a big chunk of equity to this person to be CEO, or you're not going to give them a big chunk. So in the case where they're not a perfect CEO, we give them a little bit of equity, then you have someone who's not a great CEO and isn't incentivized. Or you have a highly incentivized but not a great CEO. So like that, none of that works. And so what you're really trying to do is find somebody who can run this company now and hire and recruit talent as you go forward. So there is a chicken and egg problem here. I'm aware of it. But in some cases, actually, we have seen the academic founder or sometimes a postdoc or a graduate student who's willing to take on the role as the actual CEO, at least for the time being. So that was that's my last slide. And so what I would close with is, first of all, give you an opportunity to ask questions. And second, to also give you my contact information. Osage University Partners is a venture capital fund. What's unique about the fund is that we have partnerships with your university. And part of my job is not just to find great investments, it's also to keep the universities happy and to offer a service to the founding PIs and academics who are thinking about commercializing their own technology. So we're always happy to take a call, like a quick 30-minute call, and talk through things you're actually thinking about that are particular to your company. If you've got something that you think would be better addressed by a life science member, you can still shoot me an email. Like, we're a small office, there's only 12 or 13 of us, and I'll just send you to the right person. If you think by looking at my LinkedIn connections that there's somebody that I'm connected to that might be good for you to talk to, ask. Like, maybe I can connect you to that person. So if you don't have a ton of investor contacts and you need to start building out a network, I'm offering, my services.
I just wanted to second what David said. Our office, myself and all my colleagues, we interact pretty regularly with David and other OUP folks, and they always provide supportive information. And you can contact them, as he said, and get some advice. Like what you've had today, very practical advice based on many years of experience in this field, lots of valuable insights as well. So I think we have a few minutes for questions. You can post on the Q&A link and we can read them. Any questions? So we have recorded this session, and I think we'll be able to share that with you at some point in the future. And we'll let you know about that in an email for those who have registered. Okay, we're waiting a little bit more for questions if there are any. There's one.
What is the cost to hire a recruiter for the CEO? It's a good question. Actually, they differ from company to company. Some of them are contingent versus non-contingent, and so many of them won't charge unless they help. They find the person. Sometimes the fee is set to be kind of a percentage of the salary, or it's at least sort of proportionate to the level of the person you're recruiting. So CEO would be a top level recruit. I've seen, I don't know, they're all over the map in terms of their fee structures here. But I think you could probably think, I think that 50K is a reasonable investment in a recruiter. But just may not, some startups may not have that. But recruiting companies, you should ask for recommendations. We could probably even help you with that. Another one here is many larger companies are and should prioritize diversity. Is that being factored in CEO recruitments for startups? So for startups, what's really important here actually is that the team get along and that they create value. And we know, because there's tons of studies that show that diverse teams actually create more value. What you don't want is actually groupthink, and you don't want everybody sort of agreeing with one another all the time, and they never do anything that's innovative. So what's important is that they have enough chemistry among them that people can disagree, and they have an easy way to resolve things like that. I think that building a culture of diversity means building a culture of diversity across race, religion, gender, but also thinking, like the way that they, diversity of thought. And I think that these are like demonstrated. They have demonstrated to be a value in early stage startups. CEOs should be the person who fosters that kind of diversity. I think it really matters. And investors more and more now are looking for teams that are embodying that kind of diversity. So if it's not a CEO who, what you want is a CEO who actually looks like they have had teams in the past that have been diverse, and that they'll be doing diverse hiring now. And one of the ways that you can help ensure that is actually look for a more diverse set of candidates to be CEO for this company. So yeah, I think it's important. Everybody knows it's important. Using a person supplied by a professional employment organization as an interim solution. I'm not sure what a professional employer organization is, but I kind of think of these as EIRs. So there's a lot of different ways to do this without hiring a CEO, but not a lot. There's a few ways. I have seen sometimes an EIR come out of either one of the accelerators or some of the small funds or some of the big funds or some of the tech transfer offices also have EIRs kind of on staff to serve as interim CEOs. Those are perfectly fine. Again, interim, the title interim has some challenges when you're going to investors because they know it's an interim. In many cases, that person, like, you still have to believe they're good, right? The other thing in the absence of a CEO, the best CEO, is you could actually start the company, run the company, and instead look for someone who's kind of a chairman of the board, like a board chair. So it could be someone in your local community who has been successful. Maybe they're a seed investor, maybe they're an angel investor in your company, and ask them actually to join as a board member and help you recruit. It actually is one of these things that signals to investors that you're serious, and they can also help bring on additional follow-on capital down the road. They can help advise in a sort of interim CEO role as an interim CEO. So yeah, there's other ways to think about this, but I've definitely seen a lot of companies kind of start with an EIR or someone that it's being given to them through an accelerator or a tech transfer office. Typical salary for a CEO in a startup is different between life science and tech. So let me just say tech. I have seen everything from CEOs taking no salary to CEOs asking for, I'm going to say on the high end, over 200, or because they have a successful track record, they may it may be as high as 220, 250. It also depends the location, like whether it's the Bay Area or New York City or Boston or something like that. But it's in the middle somewhere, probably around 175, 150 is probably what I see the most. Depends though, it really does depend on their experience level. But again, I still see a lot of CEOs who take less salary than the people that they're hiring. And the reason why is because they're getting paid in equity. Their incentive is equity. Nevertheless, you can't expect CEOs to come in, all of the CEOs to come in and take zero salary. That's a great indicator that they're on board and they're all aligned in terms of incentives. But that would mean that you're limiting your search to people who are independently wealthy. And you're going back to the diversity question. That's not really diverse set of people. Is there a difference between what you look for in a CEO for a B2B versus B2C? Yeah, absolutely. So a B2B CEO has got to be someone who actually knows how to deal with complicated contracts with other businesses. They often are going to have to do things like sell through channel partners. They're going to have to do things like they're going to have to be mindful of disqualifying companies that they could be doing business with that are just going to waste too much of their time. That happens a lot in B2B sales. And you have to hire different kinds of people. Someone who's going to sell to consumers is someone who typically has, as part of their personality, just an innate ability to market and to create excitement. And that's really important, I think, for a consumer-facing company. They have a personal brand very often, which sometimes you just don't see in a B2B CEO. So I would say the personality types are different. Their experiences tend to be different as well. Like at the end of the day, they're still going to be looking at churn and customer acquisition costs and that kind of thing. But the personalities are somewhat different for an ideal CEO for a consumer-facing product versus a B2B.
All right, it looks like that was the last question on the Q&A box there. We'd like to thank David Dorsey again for sharing his wisdom with us this afternoon. And we'll be in touch with the participants with the link to the recording. And as David said, you can reach out to him if you have further questions to follow up on this topic. Thanks, everyone. Thank you again, David.
Yep, thank you for having me, and thanks for all the great questions. Feel free to reach out anytime.